Several weeks after Kenneth Arnold had his historic UFO encounter in June of 1947, he investigated a sighting in Washington state that would prove to be just as influential in UFO lore. The principal witness claimed to see a group of circular UFOs from his patrol boat in Puget Sound, and the next day, he was visited by what ufologists would now refer to as a man in black. Many researchers have concluded that the sighting was a hoax, but the media coverage, especially after a fatal plane crash carrying 2 Army investigators, convinced the world that the US government was hiding the truth on UFOs, and would kill to keep it secret. Harold Dahl worked as a boat patrolman in the waters around a logging operation in the Puget Sound area of Washington state. On June 21, 1947, just 4 days before the beginning of the flying saucer frenzy, Dahl claimed he was patrolling the eastern shore of Maury Island in a small, partially enclosed inboard boat with his 15-year-old son Charles, his family dog, and 2 unidentified co-workers. Around 2 p.m., the men spotted 6 circular shiny metal objects flying in formation between 300 and 600 meters above the water. Dahl estimated that each of the objects was about 30 meters in diameter, with a 6 to 7 meter hole in the center. There were portholes around the outside of the craft, and a dark ring around the bottom and inside of the donut. 5 of the objects circled around and above a central stationary one, before it dropped to 250 meters altitude and hovered over top of Dahl's boat. A few minutes later, another craft broke formation and moved in beside the first. After a loud banging noise, the first craft began releasing a silvery metallic debris that looked like shreds of newspaper, and later, a heavier dark substance like metal slag. The slag-like substance was scalding hot. It damaged the boat, burned Charles's arm, and killed the Dahl family dog before it stopped falling. The crew escaped to shore, where they estimated about 20 tons of the metal debris had accumulated. Dahl took a few pictures of the UFOs as the 2 nearer ones rejoined the formation hovering nearby, then all 6 of the objects flew westward out of sight. Dahl took samples of both types of debris and loaded them onto the boat, then took his son to a hospital in Tacoma. Dahl hadn't told anyone about the sighting when, the day after the incident, he was visited by a man in a black suit. The man was driving a brand new Buick sedan, also black, and though he gave no identification, Dahl assumed he was working with the government. Remarkably, the man seemed to know all about Dahl's encounter and brought him to a diner in Tacoma to discuss it. At the end of their discussion, the man cautioned Dahl not to speak of the incident to anyone, making veiled threats to his safety and the safety of his family. In spite of the warning, Dahl called the owner of the lumber mill and possible business partner, Fred Lee Crisman, telling him all about the previous day's encounter and turning over the photos and debris. Immediately, Crisman took the boat to Maury Island and saw the debris for himself. He also claimed to have seen one of the same circular craft in the distance. He later had Dahl's photos developed, but said they all turned out spotty and blurred. However, Crisman never turned these photos over to the public, and it's not clear they ever existed. In mid-July, several weeks after Arnold's own UFO sighting, Crisman contacted Ray Palmer, editor of Amazing Stories and soon-to-be editor and publisher of Fate magazine. Palmer was intrigued by the story and contacted pilot and businessman Kenneth Arnold, who had recently begun investigating UFO sightings on his own time. Arnold flew to Tacoma while Palmer had the metal debris analyzed at the University of Chicago. The results were inconclusive, and Palmer later claimed that the remaining debris was stolen from his office. Arnold called an airline pilot, Captain Emil J. Smith, who had also seen a UFO a few days prior, and arranged to meet him in Tacoma to interview the witnesses. In one of the many bizarre episodes of the case, Arnold had a second UFO sighting on the flight over, spotting 20 to 25 brass-colored objects flying less than 400 meters from his plane. What's more, he arrived at the Winthrop Hotel in Tacoma to find a room already checked out in his name. He and Smith interviewed Dahl and Crisman in this room on the afternoon of July 30th. Dahl complained of a streak of bad luck since the incident, which he attributed to the sighting. His son went into a dissociative fugue, things were breaking on his boat, and his wife had become suddenly ill. Dahl and Crisman produced samples of the metal debris they'd allegedly taken from the crash site, but Arnold found them unconvincing. Suspecting a hoax, Arnold contacted U.S. Army counterintelligence, and the next day, counterintelligence officers Lieutenant Frank Brown and Captain William Davidson joined the men at the Winthrop Hotel. Brown and Davidson interviewed Dahl and Crisman once more in the same room. During this meeting, a local reporter began receiving anonymous calls describing the interview in detail and naming all the individuals present. No one has ever determined who the informant was, but he made 4 more calls in the following days. Crisman gave a box of debris samples to Brown and Davidson, who returned to McChord Air Base. They flew out the next morning, but soon after, their engine caught fire. They crashed their plane and died about 130 kilometers south of Tacoma. The newly formed Air Force launched an investigation into the entire episode, concluding that the sighting was a hoax, that the plane crash was an accident, and that the debris was ordinary slag from a nearby aluminum smelter, though they found none of it in the wreckage. Once again, an anonymous informant began calling the local papers within minutes of the crash site being found, and even named the victims 12 hours before their identities had been publicly revealed. The informant claimed that the plane had been shot down by a 20mm cannon, and that similar attempts had been made on the lives of Arnold and Smith. Dahl and Crisman immediately began backpedaling on their stories, and denied that the samples were connected with their UFO sightings. 2 days after the crash, Dahl claimed that the whole sighting was a hoax, and stopped pursuing the case completely, although he later said he only did this because he feared for his safety. Arnold claimed that on his flight back from Tacoma, he had to crash land his plane after discovering that the fuel valve had been shut off. After the anonymous leaks, the Maury Island story broke out in the regional news, and reporters speculated that the plane crash may have been related to the alleged saucer debris in its cargo. The story went to the press already embedded with elements of conspiracy and cover-up. However, the Air Force and the FBI launched independent investigations, both concluding that Dahl and Crisman had lied about the UFO sightings, and produced the alien debris from local scrap dumps. Arnold published his version of the story in Fate magazine in March of 1948, and expanded on this narrative with Ray Palmer in his book The Coming of the Saucers in 1952. Arnold suspected a hoax, but he also suspected secret government involvement. As several researchers have pointed out, there are many reasons to believe that the Maury Island sighting was a hoax. First, it was not reported until after Arnold's sighting had already made UFOs national news, even though it allegedly happened before. Dahl's own wife accused him of lying, and his 2 children have both since said that the event never happened. Neither of the other 2 crewmen who allegedly saw the saucers were ever interviewed, or even named. Crisman had previously sent a letter to Ray Palmer claiming that he was shot with a ray gun in a cave in Burma during World War II, but he didn't disclose this to Arnold. Furthermore, he was widely thought to be a con man or a CIA agent. He was later subpoenaed in the JFK assassination for his relationship to one of the suspects. The fact that he contacted Palmer first makes it seem as though he was seeking publicity or compensation. Arnold, Smith, and Air Force investigators all inspected Dahl's boat, and determined that the damage was not consistent with the story. Finally, no one other than the principal witnesses found any more of the debris on the beach, even though Dahl and Crisman both said that there had been 20 tons of it present. But even if Dahl and Crisman lied, someone still had to book Arnold's room in his name, and leak precise details of the hotel room conversations in the plane crash. Some have speculated that the government's involvement in the Maury Island incident was a counterintelligence operation, with the possible collaboration of Crisman. A government agent may have tapped the room at the Winthrop, and booked it in Arnold's name to make sure he used it. Another agent could have listened in from outside and relayed the content of the meetings to the press, spinning a story of government cover-up. Why government intelligence would have wanted to propagate such a conspiracy theory is unclear, however. Whether the sighting was a hoax or not, it's had a seminal influence on the subsequent evolution of UFO culture. The involvement of the government, as well as the fatal plane crash, have led people to believe that there was a conspiracy at play. The case also contains the first known reference to what is now referred to as a Man in Black, or MIB, which have appeared in many UFO encounters since. When Gray Barker popularized the concept of the MIB in his influential book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers in 1956, he used the Maury Island sighting as a key piece of evidence. The MIB are thought to be either secret government agents or disguised alien henchmen, though their function and identity are shrouded in mystery. The Maury Island UFO sighting and the string of bizarre events that followed may not have been as well publicized as Arnold's sighting on June 24th, but they had no less a powerful impact on the public imagination. Liars or not, Dahl and Crisman introduced the world to the Men in Black, and infused the burgeoning UFO culture with a taste for conspiracy.